son decapitated his mother and left her body on the streets on Halloween. Her head was 5 feet away from her body, and the trick-or-treaters passing by just thought it was a Halloween decoration. The son just snapped and took a kitchen knife and severed his mother's head. Then he jumped in front of a train. I don't mean to make light of the situation, I'm just sharing the story. Follow my TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube for more content. Happy Halloween.
At the end of this street sits one of the most horrific true crime stories you'll ever hear about. The Ortega family was having a Christmas Eve dinner in Covina, California, when there was a knock at the door. There was a man there dressed in a Santa suit and armed with a gun and a flamethrower. By the next morning, 9 people would be proclaimed dead. What could cause a man to just snap like this?
Five pictures with disturbing backstories. A group of friends in Beirut, Lebanon snapped this group pic seconds before a bomb went off from inside the gold car in the background. Teen showed up to school one day in a Darth Vader outfit. His schoolmates wanted to take photos. However, the teen later used that sword to kill 2 students, injuring many others. Hiroshima picture, this time capturing the exact moment that the atomic bomb was dropped. The photographer definitely didn't survive. Photo of the family who later became famous as those involved in the Amityville horror. Pictured in the actual house that the horrendous murders took place. Police removing infamous serial killer and cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer's fridge from his home. Still filled with body parts.
Normal-looking photos that have a disturbing backstory. On Christmas Day in 1929, Charlie Lawson would murder his wife, 6 of his 7 children, and take his own life. This photo shows a nice, large family vacationing in Sweden in the 70s. The kid in the brown shirt, however, is a 14-year-old boy named Osama. Years later, Osama bin Laden founded the pan-Islamic militant group Al-Qaeda and was responsible for the 9/11 attacks. This is the last known photo ever taken of comedian Robin Williams. It was captured October 8th, 2014, just one day before he took his own life. This rare picture shows a man playing with kids in his neighborhood. If you don't recognize him, this is one of America's most infamous serial killers, Ted Bundy. This photo shows Michael and Susan Kuhnhausen after being married for 18 years. In 2006, Michael hired a hitman to kill his wife. However, Susan choked the man with her bare hands, saying, "Tell me who sent you here, and I'll call you an ambulance."
The girls in these fattening farms are force-fed to eat a ridiculous amount of food every day. For breakfast, they have a mixture of porridge, couscous, and 1 liter of sweetened camel's milk. And they don't even have time to digest this because a few hours later they have to eat again. They're given even more camel's milk to increase their appetite and expand their stomach. And then once they're finished with that camel milk, lunch is ready. By the end of the day, these girls would have consumed 9,000 calories. And to put that in perspective, that's double what a bodybuilder eats, and 5 times what is recommended for a girl that age. After feeding season, girls are eating 16,000 calories a day. That is the equivalent to eating 50 cheeseburgers a day. Like, these girls are so little. It makes me so sad that they don't have power to choose what they want to do with their bodies and be able to have a say in what they're eating. Like, if these girls don't want to eat, they are heavily punished. Like, each of these girls has a supervisor to make sure they're eating and make sure they're eating enough and a lot. And their supervisor puts 2 sticks of wood between their toes and pinches their toes if they don't eat everything. They also pull their ears, pinch their inner thighs, pull their fingers backwards. And I understand that different cultures are very different, but this just makes me so sad. More information's in part 1. And if you like my content, follow my TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. It really helps when you interact.
This has to be one of the scariest videos I've ever seen. No ghosts, no spirits, in real life. A young female real estate photographer was taking photos for her job one day. She happened to be in an occupied house. The resident began following her around. She says this wasn't unusual, so she didn't think anything of it, until she started noticing multiple locks on certain doors, and even a camera pointed toward one of these doors. When she goes upstairs, a man comes out of one of the rooms. What happens next is straight out of a horror film. You have to see the video for yourself.
Okay, so I took pictures of this house, and this guy was following me around like the whole time, which isn't unusual, but he was a little bit strange, and there was like 6 people living in this house, and it's a hoarder house. But I also noticed they have like 3 locks on the door, and then down here they have locks, and then going up here they have a camera, and it's facing this door. Anyway, a roommate comes out of this door, and he asks them if he should lock the door and kidnap me. And I said, immediately, people know where I am. And then he laughed and said, no one would ever hear from you again. Bro, I did not even finish this house. I immediately left. I was like, nope, dipped the out. You can see me right there. Hello. But yeah, pretty sure I maybe almost got kidnapped, but I don't really know.
If you're a woman and you've ever had any close calls like this, let me know in the comments below. We need to spread awareness that things like this really happen.
A man named Peter Porco hops out of bed, uses the bathroom, shaves, puts on his suit, and walks downstairs to eat breakfast. He then prepares his lunch for work that day, loads the dishwasher, writes a check for his son, and then walks outside to go get the morning newspaper. But when the door shuts behind him, he gets locked out. Luckily though, Peter has a spare key hidden in a flower pot on his front porch. He grabs it, unlocks the door, and opens it slowly just to make sure he doesn't wake up his wife, but out of nowhere, he collapses. Dead. Peter and Joan Porco are your typical modest family that live in a 2-story home in New York. They have 2 sons, John, who serves as a naval officer, and Christopher, who's a student at the University of Rochester, 200 miles away. The couple are both in their 50s and have been married for more than 30 years. Peter serves as a court clerk at the Albany courthouse and is known by his coworkers as a reliable, trustworthy guy. So when he doesn't show up for work on an important court date, everyone becomes a bit concerned. A colleague of his reaches out several times, but Peter never picks up the phone. The coworker then proceeds to drive to his home to make sure that everything is okay, but when he arrives, there's a crimson trail leading from the walkway up to the doorstep, and finally, to Peter. First responders arrive at the scene, and that's when they discover Joan Porco lying in the bed. They're shocked to see that she's alive and conscious because it's obvious she has severe head trauma and there are wounds all over her face. Afraid she won't live much longer, a detective looks at Joan and says, "Who did this to you? Do you know them?" She pauses and it's clear she's not able to make out words. She simply nods, yes. The detective then says, "Was it your son, Chris?" And again, she nods, yes. Joan is then rushed to the hospital, and after 12 hours of emergency surgery, doctors are able to save her life. However, it's clear that she's not 100%. Joan had received trauma with a blunt object 3 times to her head, causing the loss of her left eye and a fragment of her skull. It's revealed that the murder weapon is a 3-foot axe later found in the couple's bedroom. Peter's autopsy report shows that he was hit 16 times with trauma to the head, face, and body. However, the injuries, which tore off a part of Peter's jaw and exposed a part of his brain, were not the cause of his death. It was the blood loss. See, even after such catastrophic injuries, Peter was still able to get up and go about his day as though nothing happened, surviving for several hours. It's also worth noting that in the past 2 years, the Porcos had undergone 2 separate robberies where computers and electronics were stolen from the home. As detectives continue to sift through the evidence surrounding the Porco case, a news reporter makes a call to their son Chris and tells him his parents are dead. He proceeds to call 911 and see if this is actually true, and tells police that he was sleeping in the lounge of his college when his mom and dad were attacked. Now keep in mind, Joan identified Chris as her attackers, so detectives start looking for reasons why he'd be motivated to kill his parents. They begin digging into his past to find that his relationship with Joan and Peter was far from perfect. And just 2 weeks before his murder, Peter Porco had confronted his son Chris about forging his name on a $46,000 check to buy a yellow Jeep Wrangler. Investigators then come across a crucial piece of information. Joan and Peter Porco have a $1 million life insurance policy, half of which is entitled to their son Chris. 3 weeks following the grisly ambush of the Porcos, Joan, who is in a medically induced coma, wakes up. And as she starts coming to, she says that she doesn't remember anything about the night of the attack, and even goes on to defend Chris, saying that her son would never do such a thing. But his mother's defense isn't enough. The evidence keeps stacking up against Chris, with surveillance cameras from his college showing a yellow Jeep leaving campus at 10:30 on the night of the attack. The vehicle returns the following morning at 8:30, and a pair of New York toll booth operators also report seeing a yellow Jeep between the time he left and returned to campus. And when students and staff are asked if they'd seen Chris on the night of his father's murder, no one reports saying that he was sleeping in the lounge of his dorm. Also, if you're still wondering how Peter was able to go about his day with a chunk taken out of his brain, I have your answer. Basically, the paleocortex, the part of the brain responsible for daily tasks, wasn't actually injured during the attack, turning Peter into a real-life zombie, able to go about his day until eventually he bled out and died. A year later, in November 2005, Chris is indicted, and his mother, who is still severely disfigured from the attack, manages to scrape together $250,000 for bail and stay with him every day arm in arm until his trial begins in May 2007. Prosecutors argue that from their findings, Chris had manipulated his friends at school, claiming that he was a rich kid, but in reality, he was just a con man. Not only did he regularly steal money from his parents, but he himself was responsible for the 2 burglaries at the Porco home. He'd pawned the electronics off on eBay because mom and dad had cut him off. And when they cut off Chris for a 3rd time, he, in a fit of rage, drove 300 miles in his stolen Jeep to murder his parents and frame it as though it was just a burglary that had gone wrong. The defense, on the other hand, says that no physical evidence actually ties Chris to the crime scene. However, it's this one detail that proves that Chris Porco is a cold-blooded killer. On the night of the attack, someone had used the family's 4-digit passcode to enter the home and turn off the alarm before smashing it. On May 24, 2007, Chris Porco is sentenced to 2nd-degree murder and attempted murder, being sentenced to 50 years in prison. Just how was Chris able to look his mom in her disfigured face and lie to her saying he wasn't the one who did it without feeling an ounce of remorse? A psychologist working on the trial explains this phenomenon best with one word: sociopath.